this is the last book in this 4-year investigation, but it doesn't mean it's the last book from me and Chris.
Right. Good.
Well, one of your last books that you've written about the Pope, it was a shocking prediction. It's the one that really sent waves around the world. And I mean, they predicted that the Pope would resign. Popes just don't resign.
Right.
Very seldom does a Pope resign. So you wrote in a book before it happened, and you thought it was going to happen, right?
Well, actually, and it's around page 450, I don't remember exactly, but in the book Petrus Romanus, in which Chris and I said we believed that Pope Benedict was going to step down in April of 2012. We predicted that a year in advance. When 2012 came and went and it didn't appear that he had stepped down, we thought, okay, well, we missed the date. We still believe it's going to happen. No pope had retired like that in over 600 years. And we were being told by all kinds of Catholic experts, never going to happen. The Pope's going to die in office. You guys are insane. But then February 2013 rolls around. The whole world knows now that the Vatican announces that Pope Benedict has retired the Petrine office. But not only that, the same day, their El Observatorio Romano, their official media outlet, right, give an interview with the New York Times in which they admit that Pope Benedict had actually secretly resigned at the end of March in 2012, and they made it internally official April 2012, the exact date that Cris Putnam and I said that we believed that he was going to. Well, then our phones wouldn't stop ringing. We had people all over the world, including from Rome, calling us wanting to know who was our insider at the Vatican.
Wow.
And we laughingly always say now, if we told him it was the Holy Spirit, that'd really mess him up.
Yeah, truly. Yes.
Chris, it's so great to have you here.
It is.
Hey,
When that book, I was on live television when that event took place, and I think it was.
we were
I was at
Daystar.
Daystar.
Lightning struck the Vatican.
Yeah, we were on Joni's show.
Yeah, that's right. I remember seeing.
Lightning
Remember
struck the Vatican.
that day, lightning.
That's right.
And I mean, it struck.
It gets more interesting.
Did you
Really?
Have you all seen that picture, the lightning striking the Vatican? And then
The day Benedict stepped down.
we were on the air with
Joni.
Joni,
on
but
Daystar.
also with a prophet,
Yes, we were with John Paul Jackson.
John Paul Jackson, and it was an epic moment.
It really
Yes,
was.
it was.
Yeah.
And we knew you guys had predicted it, and then you weren't off, though.
Not at all.
Your date
Exactly.
was actually exactly right. How did that get mixed up?
Well, let's be really fair about how that happened, okay?
Okay.
Now, we didn't exactly get a voice from the sky that gave us that date. I dug up a lot of old documents. I found a book. There was a Catholic insider, but he happened to be dead at the time, right? His name is Father René Thibault. He's a Jesuit priest from Belgium. He was a university professor. He happened to be a passionate believer in this Malachi prophecy of the popes, to the point he wrote a book. It was all in French called Les Mysterious Prophecies of the Popes, in French, and I had to translate this book. But the crazy thing was, over and over again, the year 2012 was there. I could see that even without translating it, right? And he had these elaborate schemes where he calculated the same date over and over again as the date the final pope would arrive. Okay, this was in print, provable. I have a copy at my office, 1951.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about 2012.
64 years ago.
You know, the Mayan calendar wasn't on the news. You know, nobody knew about any of that. And yet, this is what he said. One of the simplest ways is in 1950, he calculated the average reign of a pope. Just took the number of years divided by the number of popes. And he got 11 years. And he goes, if I extrapolate that to the rest of the list, it'll land in 2012. I even have a spreadsheet on my website that shows all of that. So, you know, we heard this over and over again. And then Tom emails me an article, the Vatican Insider, and it said, rumors spread that Benedict may step down. And so we just went for it, and we put it in the book because it was very interesting, and it had to do with the prophecy of the popes. And, you know, that's kind of risky because our book came out in March. And so we're predicting the Pope will step down a month later. That's not a long shelf life if you're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why, when prophets give you the exact date and it's way before, people always said, how do you know if a prophet is real?
You have to test.
All I say is if their prophecies come true, most likely their prophets are for real. They're a real prophet.
I don't like to call myself a prophet. I mean, I call myself a researcher. I mean, Rene Thébault might be a prophet. I don't know. But he was right.
But there has to be instinct and discernment. You have to, and even a little guts to be able to write what you find and what's being revealed. And isn't there something that happens inside of you when you see truth and you know that you're finding it in pieces and pieces, and then you put it together? And this new book that comes out today on our show, The Final Roman Emperor, the Islamic Antichrist, and the Vatican's Last Crusade. You do have short titles.
I know. I'm trying to figure out how are we going to shorten it when we're talking about it with each other, like
The book,
Jim and I.
we'll call it the new book.
Yeah.
But how many prophecies would you say are in this new book?
Well, there are several predictions that we make, but they're probably the biggest predictions we've ever made before. And there is another part, and we'll talk about this maybe later as we get into the book, where what I call the quickenings. And it has to do with the fact that when I was a young preacher, I died. I was dead for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
And I went to a place, and there were things that happened. Like I say, we can talk about that a little bit later. But since that day, there have been moments, it always happens in the middle of the night, where I will literally just wake up, sit up out of bed, and I will know that I know something. And I have to jump up and write it down as fast as possible because it'll start going away from me.
Yes.
But I'll see it as clearly as a vision. And every time that has happened in my life, that has come to pass very accurately. The Assemblies of God, the Oregon District, there were some things I told them, the superintendent on down, that happened including the death of a guy, that happened exactly in the way that I said that it was going to happen. Well, what had happened when Cris Putnam was doing this research, and he uncovered this amazing prophecy of the mysterious prophecy of the popes by Father Rene Thébault, we were just looking at it as research. Okay, it's kind of interesting. He's approaching this from all these different angles, including mystical angles, Catholic mysticism, the planet, the movement of the planets and the stars, and just all kinds of stuff, right? But we were only looking at it as a researcher until one night, middle of the night, bam, it hits me like a rocket, and I literally sat up in bed and I knew that Chris had found something here, and it was absolutely going to happen in April of 2012. So I jumped up, I wrote everything down, I got a hold of him, and that's when we started becoming a little more vocal about the fact that we really believe this is going to happen. We had, we never said, "Thus saith the Lord God."
Yeah.
We didn't do that. We both say we're not prophets. We're just very careful researchers. But sometimes you see things, whether or not you're a prophet, as a seer, and you just have a confidence about it. You know it's going to happen, right? You've done that, Jim.
Yeah.
There have been times in your life when you've seen things. You on one of your programs not long ago, you talked about some of the things you believe is going to happen in America. Those are things you see, and when they come to you clearly as a vision, they're so powerful that whether or not the rest of the world believes it, you can't do anything but believe it. You know it's going to happen. So you have a level of conviction about it, right?
Now, this book, we haven't even gotten into forgive me, but I'm going to call it the good stuff. Yeah. Because what's coming in the last days, there's really good coming as well as some bad. I want you to have this. We get to introduce this book, one of the first people on earth to be able to introduce this book. So can you bring us up to where we're going to introduce this new book?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the prophecy of the popes happens exactly like we said it was going to. Our phones are lit up. And now we're out there. We're doing media everywhere, right? We're on your show. We're on Sid Roth. We're on all these Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. We're just doing all these programs, right? And whenever we were on a program where people could call in, they were asking a question at that time. They were asking, what do you make of the Vatican being out there now talking about aliens? And do you think it's somehow connected to this final Pope's arrival? That question was coming up over and over because if you can recall, At the time, they had the WikiLeaks scandal. That's why the Pope, by the way, retired privately to just a few members of the Curia, because people were leaking information out of the Vatican office. They were trying to control it. That's why he did it in secrecy. But at the same time, around that time, the Vatican had what they called an astrobiology study week at the Pontifical Academy in Rome, where all of Rome's astronomers and scientists and whatever work. But it was the question around that astrobiology week was this: what will the impact on faith, on Christianity be, given the disclosure or the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence? And the world was like, what in the world is Rome calling scientists from around the world to convene a study to say what is going to be the impact on Christianity? And that's happening at the same time with the Pope. So they're saying the final Pope is arriving. Is that somehow connected with this whole thing with the aliens? What in the world? So the Vatican sent out their two top astronomers, Jose Gabriel Funes, who at that time was the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group. I don't want to get bogged down here in too many details. And Guy Consolmagno, who was the Pope's private astronomer, and we interviewed him 5 times from Rome via the internet. I found some amazing things about stuff they believe, too. But we were trying to get to the bottom of this. Why are you suddenly talking about aliens? Why are you out there saying we would baptize aliens into the Catholic faith, right? And then they started changing it. And the way they started changing the language started becoming very concerning. They started saying, it's more likely than not that we are at official disclosure. And you've got to wonder, what do they know or think they know that they would be saying something like that? And then they started saying, it probably won't be us baptizing the aliens into the Catholic faith, but rather they will be coming here to baptize us into a corrected understanding of the gospel. In Rome right now, there are Opus Dei level, top level theologians for the church that are writing white papers that are going through the doctrinal review process right now that literally say that we could make the discovery of information, extraterrestrial information, that is going to require us to rethink everything we've ever thought we knew about the gospel, about the Godhead. And so it just, all these red flags were, what do these people think they know? Have they made like some Mephistophelian bargain with some entity that they think is an intelligence? Where are they coming from, right? Why are they saying this stuff? We're going to have to rewrite the gospel. We're going to have to change. And then they started saying it's going to be required. So we finally said, okay, the only way to get to the bottom line, we got to try to go to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. And you remember that? Yes. That's what we went from the prophecy of the popes over to Exo-Vaticana, right? And we went to the top of Mount Graham. We met with the Jesuit who was on duty there that day. They let us walk all over the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope. We went to the radio telescope. We went to the top of the hill. They gave us half a day with a private guide, a technician, in the large binocular telescope, the largest telescope of its kind in the world, where the LUCIFER device is at. And just a huge amount of opportunity, right? But then we come off the mountain, now we think we know everything, right? We rush that book to the printer, and then we get contacted by the Apache Nation. Because I had said on your program and on some other programs, the Apaches were on Mount Graham ahead of everybody else, and that's why they fought in federal court to try to stop the Vatican and NASA from building an observatory on the top of that mountain, because it's like a graveyard. There's dead bones of their people up there, right? And they don't want machines in there disturbing the ground. And that's why they were fighting against them. Well, then I get contacted by a member of the Apache Nation, and he said, well, that's true, but that's not really the picture. And he was the one who informed us that Mount Graham is one of the 4 holiest mountains in all of the world to all American indigenous peoples, all American Indian tribes. And it is because, they said, that mountain is what you would call a stargate, a doorway, a portal, through which entities have entered into and exited this 3-dimensional reality since the dawn of time. And then when we learned that's true, I went out and vetted that was true, then we really had to wonder, why would the Vatican have fought in federal court to get on the top of that mountain. Why not just go to a different mountain, right? And build your
Right.
observatory.
Yeah.
Towns that would love to have you for the industry or whatever,
Sure.
right? Why that mountain? So that led, of course, to the last time we were here with the book On the Path of the Immortals. Cris Putnam in Sedona, me in the Four Corners area. We shot a lot of film. By the way, we're going to be producing a documentary film on that.
Wow.
But then we said, okay, we're done. We're finished. That's it, right? But then we came full circle, because if you read these 4 books, there's this one personality that keeps turning up in all 4 books, and that is the Cumae Sibyl, the oldest of the prophetesses of the god Apollo, which, by the way, is prophesied in the scripture as the spirit that's going to inhabit the Antichrist at the end times. She turns up in all 4 books. Why? Because her prophecies were Christianized by the early Roman Catholic Church. They believe in her prophecies as much as they believe in the prophecies of the Old Testament prophets. And she made a prophecy that this guy uncovered on the final Roman emperor, and it ties everything that we had been talking about together in one unit, and it packs a wallet, brother. What they believe, and when they believe it's going to happen, is astonishing. There are events that are unfolding in the world, and I want to know if they're part of biblical prophecy. In other words, if what the prophets in the scripture foresaw also includes activity that's being done by these people that in their heart, I'm not saying Catholics are occultists, but there are occultists who also believe in these prophecies. They're codified in Washington, D.C., at the Vatican, the structures. These things were engineered in ancient times for one express purpose, and that was to literally bring up the spirits of Nephilim from out of the underworld to re-inhabit bodies once again. This was deeply occultic material that came from the Watchers. So if you're going to read the Old Testament, for instance, and I said this the last time I was on your program, if you don't understand what went on with the Watchers and Psalms 82 and the divine council, you can't understand a great deal of the Old Testament. Doesn't even make any sense to you. You think God's a genocidal maniac. What in the world's he doing telling Saul and all the armies of Israel to go out and wipe out all these people? The only way you can understand that is to understand that there was a genetics revolution that went on. All flesh, both man and beast, became corrupt. And these entities came down to the world to literally wipe out God's people.
Satanic.
And take it was
right?
yeah. So in the same way, I think you can only understand some of what's unfolding around the world today
Okay.
if you understand where these people are coming from and what they believe. Let me say this, to us, the Bible is the only absolute authority.
Yes,
right?
amen. That's right.
We don't need the American Indian myths or anything else to make us believe in this, right?
Exactly.
And by the way, what America needs now we need good presidency. We need a lot of stuff, but America more than anything else needs preachers of this word.
Of the word. Right.
Preachers of the word. So that's what we believe. All we like to do, we love history. And if you go to Bible college to earn a degree at a seminary to become a pastor, you have to study history. You study American history, biblical history. You study books that were, contiguous to some of the other books of the time. So you have to study all this stuff. But what you do is you get a richer understanding of the cultural things that were going on and whatever that makes you appreciate when you read texts in the scripture, you get a better understanding of what they're talking about, how that was happening, how that was playing out in the real world. But I have to say, it was thrilling to find out that the oldest stories of the American Indians say this: there was a good creator God who made everything that was good. There was a terrible reptilian being that came down to deceive the world. There were giants that emerged upon the earth. God sent a flood around the world that wiped out all of the giants and saved mankind from that destruction. So they literally over here are writing this down while Moses over there is writing the Pentateuch saying there were giants in the earth in those days. So it is a corroboration. Those people didn't even have, they didn't have the internet. They weren't talking to each other. They were just writing it down as it happened. So it corroborates and it builds our faith even more to know that this wasn't just a bunch of old Hebrew dudes sitting around saying, we ought to come up with some cool stories, right? It's the Word of God. It's rich and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, right?
I'd like to just add a little bit to that, because I mean, a lot of people criticize Tom and I because we look at these extra biblical prophecies and things of a pagan nature or even an occult nature. But you know, where I'm coming from is if Christianity is true, it's true. And I mean that's important to say these days.
Yeah.
People don't believe in absolute truth, do they?
No, they
Everything's
don't.
relative, right? And you have your truth, and I have my truth. And that's the biggest piece of nonsense that's ever been sold on our country. And that's why we're here. That's where we are today.
That is the truth.
Believe it or not. It happened in the 60s, and it's moved forward, this relativism. It's all through our morality. And unfortunately, it happens to be in our financial institutions now, too. Typically, math does not have a lot of subjective type of thinking, but apparently it does nowadays. And so, you know, that's where we are in the world, and that's the way people think. Now, what we're saying is if Christianity is true, even these pagan nations, even these occultists, they can't help but betray that fact. All right? Now, when Yahweh forbids sorcery, necromancy, these things that Christians don't like to talk about too much, that implies that Yahweh believes they're real. Because he wouldn't make rules about things you couldn't do. He didn't tell me not to fly like a chicken. You know, he was serious.
Yeah.
Because those things do something, all right? And because they do, if you know, Israel becoming a nation again in 48 is as significant as we believe it is. You know, the time's short, and we should be seeing a ramping up in the occult realm because they know it's coming too. And so we're just keeping our eyes open. And, you know, I call our genre speculative eschatology. And I admit I'm speculating most of the time because I don't know. I'm not an absolutist when it comes to my theory about the end times because I think God keeps that mysterious for a reason. You know, the devil reads his prophecies too. I think God wants to keep him guessing.
Yeah, that's a good word right there. Yeah.
We've
Hope you
been
guys
we've
are
been
listening.
bumping
You
up
have to-
against the final Roman emperor. And Chris, who or what is the final Roman emperor? Can you explain that to me?
Sure.
Why is it relevant today?
The Antichrist.
Okay.
I mean, that's who I think it is. And whether he's really a Roman or not, I don't care. I mean, that's not the
Oh,
point.
that is relevant to me.
It's a revived Roman Empire
I don't want
in a sense.
There's a lot of people are going to accept the Antichrist according to the scriptures
Sure.
because
I mean,
they're
the
going to
word
be
Roman-
deceived by him,
The
right?
word Roman to me is vague, is what I mean by that. I don't mean he has to be Italian or from the city of Rome
Yeah.
or necessarily of Roman origin. It might have another connotation that I don't quite understand. And that isn't really part of the prophecy. But, I mean, the final Roman emperor is really a fictional character, okay? But the people that believe in it will believe the Antichrist is that guy. That's kind of what I mean. So he doesn't necessarily have to be anything for real. Now, here's the deal. Catholics and Muslims believe in a final king who's going to show up before Jesus and set the world to their belief system. Okay, for Muslims, he's called the Mahdi. For Roman Catholics, he's usually called the Great Catholic Monarch, or sometimes he used to be called the Great French King because they thought he would be in the tradition of Charlemagne. Okay, and they believed French was traditionally a Catholic country, that this great king would arrive and convert the whole world to Catholicism. Now, you can find their prophets writing about this all throughout the late Middle Ages, you know, up into the time of the Reformation and on forward. In today's modern Catholic network, you'll have Desmond Birch has an end time show, and he talks about this great Catholic monarch. And this is a 20th century show, a new show right now. It's on. So they still believe this guy. Now, I'm going to tell you that final Roman emperor character and the Mahdi are the same character, but he's a literary type, and he doesn't exist.
Wow. We're sitting here kind of blown away.
Zach, did you know this?
Well, I read the book, so yes.
But I mean that the Catholic Church is looking for a king besides Jesus.
They are.
That shocks me. I'm sorry.
Not even the Pope.
Nobody's ever told me that.
Yeah.
And it gets
And
even.
I need to study more, I guess.
There are certain things that even get more interesting than that with with what the Roman Catholic Church foresee as the end times of the destruction of Rome. The Roman Catholics actually believe that Rome is going to be destroyed.
And the Muslims want to do it.
They do.
And
Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the interesting point that Chris was just now making.
We're in an
is
era,
that-
people. We're coming on some stuff. You better know a little bit about what's coming on Earth. Otherwise, you're going to be really, really going crazy, because you're going to say, "My Lord, what's happening?" But to know some truth won't hurt at all.
Well, this final Roman emperor, or the great Catholic monarch, or what the Muslims would call the Mahdi,
Yeah.
all came out of a prophecy from the Cumae Sibyl. And the Cumae is the most famous of the ancient prophetesses of the god Apollo. So when she's talking about there is going to come a final world dictator, a benevolent dictator, by the way, imagine that, a benevolent dictator. She's talking about Apollo. She's talking about the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is her prophecy that "'tis thine own Apollo reigns." He is going to literally rise up from out of the underworld, inhabit a man, and become the king of planet Earth. So it's strange how this went full circle, but it was her prophecy that was Christianized by the Roman Catholics throughout the Dark Ages and became what they call the great Catholic monarch. Now, I believe, by the way, that this is, Chris made a reference a moment ago to that program. That's on there's a 24-hour-a-day.
ETWN.
Yeah, ETWN, 24-hour-a-day Catholic network. It was on that program recently. They were talking about, we're living in prophetic times and the great Catholic monarch is on his way.
Yeah.
Well, Chris found evidence that the Muslims actually plagiarized the prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl and turned it into the Mahdi doctrines. When Joel Richardson was here talking about the Islamic Antichrist, they actually took the same prophecy of the Cumae, but they said, "Oh, no, not going to be your king, going to be our king. We're going to call him the Mahdi." And it became their popular doctrine, but it's who we in evangelical Christianity would call the coming of the Antichrist.
So.
Now, here is
Well, would I love to get Joel and you? Would you I'm going to do a big show. I like to get about 25 of my favorite prophets all together, because everybody's had a piece to add. And I'll tell you, we're in a day that you need some revelation, because I'll tell you what, these days are coming.
And there are Christians and, of course, the non-Christian world following what they believe to be true. But if it's not in the Bible, it is nothing more than a deception and a lie. And it's going to lead ultimately to a violent conflict. And in this book, Chris has written an excellent chapter on the battle for the holy mountain of God, which is the Temple Mount. That's why there's so much strife in Israel today over what happens on the Temple Mount. That's where the final battle, Armageddon, will take place. And but the prophecies that are being followed by Muslims, by our brothers and sisters, the Jewish people, and by many within the Christian church today are based on things that are not in the Bible. And because of that, we are going to wind up with a lot of blood being shed before Jesus comes down to straighten things out.
Wow. Tom, you believe that Catholics have set themselves up for deception.
Yeah. Well, because of what Derek and Chris were just saying and what they've written about in this book. Think about this prophecy that is believed by modern Catholics today. Their prophets, their mystics, they're talking about it right now. They're blogging about it right now. You know why they believe, by the way, that the arrival of the final Roman emperor, or what they call the great Catholic monarch, might be here, might be imminent, is because part of the Cumae Sibyl's prophecy said he will appear when the final pope arrives. When a final pope arrives, and the Catholics call him the angelic pope. When this final pope arrives, he's going to help this emperor. Now,
so you had already, your last book, you predicted the final pope.
Right.
That's the first one.
And so, I mean, it's crazy that a pope would resign, but this was supposed to be the final pope. And so these things could be happening. So there's an old saying that they don't use anymore. It's later than you think.
Yeah. Well, so this is a headline. This was published like 4 days ago now, from the Catholic News Association, which is actually owned by the 24-hour EW, whatever it is, the Catholic.
Yeah.
Eternal world.
Yeah. It's owned by them. This is their news service. Well, look at the headline. Is Francis the last pope? A rare interview with Archbishop Gonçalves. Now, let me tell you 2 reasons why this is very important. Because Archbishop Gonçalves is the Pope's personal pastor. He is an archbishop. He is a prefect, meaning that he's like, the upper crust, if you will, at the Vatican. And he's Benedict's personal secretary, so he works with both of these popes, right? So they interviewed him and they said, what do you make, 2 things. They said, what do you make of lightning striking the Vatican 2 times on the day that Pope Benedict stepped down? The guy that's interviewing him says, some people think there could have been some mystical qualities to that. And he goes on to admit that that very day he talked to Pope Benedict about it when they found out that lightning struck the Vatican 2 different times, and they both felt that nature, that the mystical order had spoken, that this was acceptable to the gods. Now, where are they coming from with this? Because if you understand the old Roman word inauguratio, where we make the word inauguration when we inaugurate a president or we inaugurate a new pope, that comes from inauguratio in augur, atio. The augurs were the soothsayers of ancient Rome. Well, when they wanted to know, do the gods approve of the appointment of a new pope, a new king, a new leader, they would do their rituals in front of the gods. But if the gods answered with thunder and lightning, they knew that this appointment, this change, had been approved by the gods. And so this archbishop is, when he's saying nature had spoken, he's telling you exactly the belief system of the ancient augurs. The gods had appointed Benedict to step down so this final pope could arrive. But then it gets even more interesting, and I don't like reading stuff.
I do.
But here's a little short excerpt.
This is amazing stuff.
So then he says, okay, well, what about the prophecy of the popes? Some people are making a big deal, i.e. Tom, Horn, and Cris Putnam are making a big deal about it, right? What do you think about it? Well, here's what the Archbishop says. Okay, during the interview, it referenced an old prophecy that has recently gained traction in some clerical discussions. The prophecy of the popes, also known as the prophecy of Malachi, according to which, this is what and this guy's a Catholic, the Roman guy for Catholic News Service is interviewing him. He says, according to which Pope Francis is considered to be the last pope. Here's what the Archbishop says. Indeed, when looking at that prophecy and considering how there was always a sound reference of popes mentioned in its history, it gives me the shivers, Archbishop Gonçalves said. Although Catholics are not required to accept the prophecy, speaking from a historical experience, one has to say, yes, this is a wake-up call. So you have the Archbishop who is the personal pastor. So you know that this Archbishop has private conversations with Benedict and with Pope Francis, and this subject has evidently come up because he didn't say, I don't know what you're talking about, or I got to get back to you. He said, this has caused shivers to go up our spines, and it is, what is his final line there? It is a wake-up call. He is the final pope. This is the first time that a highly placed Vatican representative has given credibility to the prophecy of the popes. Well, now, so bring it back over. Why do I say it's a great deception? Because here's the way this prophecy works. It says that first, there is going to be a great dictatorial leader, this benevolent dictator known as the great monarch. He's going to arrive, and this final pope is going to help him set up a global dictatorship, right? They are going to resist the arrival of the Antichrist. They, the Catholics believe, are going to be the ones who are going to fight against the coming of the Antichrist. That is absolutely backward from what we believe the book of Revelation says, where it says, no, first, there's going to come a deceiver claiming to be a Christ-like character, an Antichrist, and a false prophet who is going to help him get national attention. They're going to go to war, all right, but they're going to war against the return of the real Jesus Christ. So they've taken the book of Revelation and literally turned it backwards, and they are setting up the Roman Catholic, which is, of course, a very large part of our world population, setting them up to accept the coming of the Antichrist as their savior. And this false prophet as their angelic pope, saying they're going to be the ones to fight against the Antichrist, which will actually be the second coming of Jesus, and they are going to go to war. It's called the Battle of Armageddon. So it is a monstrous, astonishing level of deception, and now the Vatican is weighing in. Now the Vatican itself is saying, yes, he is the final pope.
All these things are happening, and yet the church people are not very many looking at what's happening now, so that the day will not come upon you unaware. I keep saying that. But he said, I don't want that day to come upon you unaware. He wants you to know what's happening. Now, this book, you've been with us about, I think, 2 days now on our show. Yeah. And we haven't even gotten into forgive me, but I'm going to call it the good stuff, because the what's coming in the last days, there's really good coming as well as some bad. And you got a lot yet to tell us on this program. Tom, you make some pretty big predictions in this book. Mm-hmm. I want you to give us some examples of what you see coming.
Well, first of all, I believe that ISIS and their cohorts are going to use a weapon of mass destruction soon.
Oh, you started right out with a big one.
Yeah. And I believe it's going to be a trigger event that is going to cause both the Roman Catholics and the Islamic State to believe that they are in the middle of their end times prophecies. How is that going to happen? Now, I go into a lot of detail in the book, which we can't cover all of that sitting here on this program. Right. What I predict is not going to be pretty. A weapon of mass destruction, and it's going to be of such size and scope as to call for the Pope to call for the rejuvenation of the Christian rules for just war, to call for a coalition army through the United Nations. The U.S. will be involved, Russia will be involved, some of the Muslim nations will be involved, and they will put together a coalition army. But what's going to wipe out ISIS, to track them to the ends of the earth and obliterate them. Now that's going to play right into the hands of the Islamic radicals, because that's exactly what they want.
Can you get that? You wrap your mind around that we have an enemy that wants us to destroy them?
Yes.
Because their war, a war upon them, will bring their
Mahdi.
Christ or Mahdi.
Right.
Who we call the Antichrist.
Right. Well, and the other part about this, so think how this will be a fulfillment of their prophecy. Joel Richardson's been on your program. He has explained the belief system. I've heard Zach explain this on television before too, how they believe that they're going to have this pivotal war. Part of it will be at Dabiq, which is kind of their version of Armageddon, right? Yeah. But their 13 or 1600-year-old hadith that is allegedly given by Muhammad said that at the end of time they will go to war against the armies of Rome. Now, a lot of people have tried to figure out, well, how in the world is that going to work, right? But the way the Islamic radicals are going to see this is if the Pope calls for the justification of just war from Roman Catholicism, they're going to see this army fighting under the banner of Rome as a new crusade. They're going to see it as a literal fulfillment of their 1600-year-old hadith. But the Vatican, on the other hand, are going to see it as their own apocalyptic vision, leading to the arrival of their final Roman emperor. Oh. The person who's going to come alongside them and help them defeat the enemy. And so both of them are going to see themselves in the midst of their own apocalyptica. By the way, some other very interesting things about this ancient prophecy from the Cumae Sibyl that was adopted and Christianized by the Roman Catholics and then used by the Mohammedans to create this doctrine that Joel Richardson's book was written about. 3 things she says is going to happen. Number 1, she says, this will happen when a final pope arrives. So once again, it ties directly to the arrival of the final pope. Secondly, she says, democracy will be viewed around the world as a failed system.
Wow.
And that's why you get a final Roman emperor, because the world's going to want to return back to a socialistic Marxist type of dictatorial system. She literally predicted that this will happen. Now, look at America today, where 70% of Americans polled say they have lost confidence in democracy. And now the Pope is pushing for socialism, Marxism, so you literally have the unfolding of this prophecy around us right now, right? And then the third thing that she said will happen, she said this Pope will combine with this Pope and this Emperor, the angelic Pope and the final Emperor will combine themselves with the Mohammedan religions and the Jewish religions, and they'll drive out the extremists. So they'll drive out the extremists like the Islamic radicals called ISIS, but they'll embrace the rest of the Muslim communities. They'll drive the radicals out of Christianity too, Jim. I.e. Bible-believing people like us. They're going to drive them out. And what's happening in our world right now? The Pope's meeting with the Grand Imam. The Pope's meeting with the Muslims. He's having Muslim prayers inside the Vatican. He has said that the Muslims ought to be breeding throughout Europe to assure their dominant presence for the future. He's saying all these things, right? But we got to stamp out the extremists. That's what we got to do. We got to work together to get rid of the extremists. Here in the United States, what are we hearing? There are limits on our free speech, where our Christian universities are being told they can't say certain things that are politically incorrect because we're the extremists. What was the first thing when a man attacked that gay bar the other day? First thing the next day, the Christians are being blamed. It's our fault. We're the ones that caused this because of the extremists in our faith that believe that some things are a sin, and we shouldn't be saying that, we shouldn't be talking about it. We're the ones that created the atmosphere in which this kind of radicalism, the fires of radicalism are growing. So her prophecy, it is as if today we are seeing every bit, piece, and part, from the final Pope to the Catholic mystics talking about it on television, saying, we think maybe the man is here. We think it's about to happen. To this week, a top archbishop in Rome saying, it sends shivers up our spine, but it's clearly a sign that the final Pope is here. I mean, really? If people can hear this stuff and not get shaken, I just can't help them.
Yep. And I could provide some documentation for the claim he's making about the Pope. I mean, I think all the things that we said in Petrus Romanus, we said that we thought this last Pope would be the false prophet of biblical prophecy before Pope Francis was elected, okay? But everything he's done since then has done nothing but confirm that. That doesn't mean it was right, but it doesn't mean it was wrong, okay? Now, the way you disprove a hypothesis in science, you try to falsify the hypothesis. Nothing has falsified it, and everything he's done has fallen right in line. That doesn't mean I know he's the false prophet, but he's a false prophet, okay? And he said this in regard to socialism. Equitable economic and social progress can only be attained by joining scientific and technical abilities with an unfailing commitment to solidarity accompaniment by a generous, disinterested spirit of gratuitous at every level. A combination to this equitable development must also be made by both the international activity aimed at the integral human development of all the world's peoples by the legitimate redistribution of economic benefits by the state.
Yeah.
That's Karl Marx.
Right.
Yes. Socialism, communism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right?
It makes no sense, because what people are saying is the current system of government isn't working, so let's give the government more power.
Right.
Yeah. The Bible keeps saying about believing a lie in the last days. I've never seen the mass of a world, people, believing lies.
Right.
I mean, you got a group of people that wants to kill us, and no one wants to stop them.
Right.
And Graham, I don't know if you saw the show that she was on, but she was on a few weeks ago, and she sat right where you are, and she says, no matter what, she says, I will never vote for a Democrat. And I'm, oh my God, they're coming for me now. This is it. That's as far as you're going to go. But she said the reason I would not vote for a Democrat is because of their platform, what they stand for. And she said, I cannot stand for the killing of babies.
Right.
But yet the church today, most of them believe that.
Look, if people read this book, it's not all doom and gloom. We also predict the greatest revival in the history of humanity,
That's
right?
right. That's at the end.
I personally think, look,
America
here's what
and
I
coming
think.
revival.
I think that the world is ready for a revolution.
Yes.
I think that Americans are ready for a revolution. It kind of reminds me of the Jesus movement with the hippies.
Yes.
Remember the Jesus freaks,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And marching on Washington, D.C., they were against the Vietnam War. They no longer trusted the government, whatever. But,
They were kinda right.
when you turn away
Yeah.
from your authoritarian figures, you
Right.
still need an authority. And what happened with the Jesus people was they found God. They
That's
found
it.
Christ, right? So I think what we're seeing right now is very healthy. Now, and by that what I mean is Donald Trump, who can't put 7 words back to back in a cohesive sentence, is not only the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, but his numbers in the primaries were ahead of everybody in recent memory, right? So what is that saying? It's saying that the American people are sick and tired of career politicians telling them one thing, then doing something else, and in the meantime, raising taxes to pay for more abortions. Americans are tired of that. And they don't trust either of the 2 establishment parties, right? But what you just saw in Brexit, what you just saw in Europe,
Yes.
tells you that this is not just an American condition.
Yes.
This is a global condition right now. People are sick and tired of being ran by elites and international bankers. Franklin Graham said something smart this week when he said something to the effect that the New World Order elite just got a black eye, right?
Right.
So I think it's healthy. I think it's really healthy, but I'm not oblivious to the fact that nationalism also gave rise to Adolf Hitler.
Right.
So I think we have to be really careful about where we're going, with what's happening right now. But for me personally, I put a positive spin on it. I'd have loved to have had another Ronald Reagan, but he's not here, right?
That's right.
And it gives me nightmares to think of 4 more years of the current policy or worse under a Democratic president. That's a really scary thought.
And this ISIS, what kind of warfare? It's a major mega bomb of some sort? Is that what you're seeing from ISIS?
A weapon of mass destruction.
Right.
So it could be an EMP bomb, it could be an atomic bomb,
Chemical weapon, maybe?
Chemical, most likely.
Yeah.
chemical.
That'd be the easiest.
Dirty bomb.
Dirty bomb. Yeah,
And not just in one place. That's why I'm not saying one thing. It's going to be
It might be coming to pass now. We've had terrorists.
numerous devices, all coordinated at the same time.
How soon could this be?
Tomorrow.
Yeah. I think it's happening now.
God has shown me what ISIS is going to do multiple things. We talk about on it.
talk about
and
like
what
a-
he showed
a
me
day of jihad.
a couple of years ago. But it's multiple things. It could be 100 things
Yes.
at 1 minute.
That's right.
Right.
Bam, all over on time. You ain't seen nothing. You think Orlando was big?
Right.
That was one person doing that.
They're getting started. Yeah.
What happened in California? There was 2 people there, and they killed 14 people. Other people have had their heads cut off in the United States. Other people, there's been a lot of terrorism.
Sure.
But what's going to happen when 100 malls or 100 schools or 100 assembly places or football games or whatever, and they're already importing this stuff across the borders?
Sure.
Do you believe that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they're doing it with the internet.
Yeah.
They use Twitter, Facebook for all of it. They recruit that way.
Well, yeah. They send out like 94,000 tweets a day,
Right.
ISIS does.
Yeah.
Like
What?
94,000
Yes.
a day.
Are you watching
Yes.
them?
Yeah, I know. I know. I'm afraid to put, I kind of want to see what they're saying, but I'm afraid to even, I'm afraid
You might
to
get
put
branded as one,
Yeah,
you know.
I'm afraid they'll come after me or something. But
Well, I know
no.
I know you've had Dr. William Forstchen
Yes.
as a guest on this
Yeah.
program here. His book, Day of Rage, is
Yeah.
one of the scariest things I've ever read because
Day
it
of Wrath.
puts out a very plausible scenario where weak targets, soft targets, elementary schools are targeted by individual agents that have filtered into the country.
Yeah, one of the things in that book, they shoot up a school, kill the whole school basically, then all the parents come to the school to rescue their kids.
Right.
The traffic backs up, and then the plan is
To get them.
they go through and shoot up all the cars, all the mothers and fathers,
Yeah.
all of the people coming in that are stuck in all this traffic caused by their catastrophe. The plans are devious beyond words. What do you think about, Trump's involvement in this? And Trump is not what you wouldn't elect him for Pope even. You wouldn't elect him for your preacher.
Yeah, we're electing a president though. We're not electing a preacher.
Right.
And I couldn't agree more with what Trump has said. And I have an article here from Breitbart. It says this: Obama administration and UN announce global police force to fight extremism
Right.
in the United States. Now, the extremists, who are they talking about?
You.
Because they're not talking about the Islamic extremists. They're talking about extremists like you and I. It says, Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced at the United Nations that her office would be working in several American cities to form what she called the Strong Cities Network, CSM, or SCM, a law enforcement initiative that would encompass the globe. All right, so we're talking about a global police force that would be in the United States across the globe, regulated by the United Nations. This amounts to nothing less than the overriding of American laws, up to and including the United States Constitution, in favor of the United Nations laws that would henceforth be implemented in the United States itself without any consultation of Congress at all. So basically, what the UK just left the European Union, because their laws overshadowed national laws, is what they're saying here with the creation of this global police force, that they would override our national laws in America.
Right.
It says the United Nations is Sharia compliant, a world body, and Obama, speaking there just days ago, insisted that violent extremism is not exclusive to Islam, which it basically is. Obama is redefining jihad terror to include everyone but the jihadists.
Right.
So will the UN, driven largely by the Sharia enforcing organization of Islamic cooperation and the pro-Islamic post-American President Obama, use a global police force to crush counter jihad forces? So he's saying, listen, we're going to use the UN to crush counter jihad forces. Those that are saying, listen, we need to stop jihad, those are the extremists, we need to stop them.
Right.
And talking about that, there's one more article, just interesting to note, that the United Nations, the UN military vehicles, this week have been seen rolling down a Virginia interstate. They've seen them in Virginia. They've seen them in Kentucky. They've seen these UN military vehicles even in Texas. Now, all this started taking place when Loretta Lynch, with the Obama administration, announced that there was going to be a United Nations global police force.
One of the things that the president has done, which is really a disservice to the American people, is by constantly using terms like violent extremism and radical Islam.
Right.
ISIS is not radical Islam. It is mainstream Islam.
That's
It is a
right.
purer form of Islam.
It is.
Islamic experts who actually know history and have looked over 14 centuries of Islamic history will say
It's
the
typical.
Islamic State is trying to go back to the way they lived it in the 7th century. It is not radical. It is mainstream. It is violent Islam. And sadly, that is what you get when you actually read the Quran and follow it faithfully.
compare Muhammad and
Really
Jesus.
good.
That's right.
Right.
You know?
Well, and actually, the Pope did recently compare Muhammad and Jesus when he said that the New Testament church could be thought of as
really?
being, that their
Great Commission was like jihad.
ambition to be evangelical,
But
to
they didn't
preach
do it
the
with a
gospel.
sword.
Well, but I'm saying he made that comparison
Right.
too.
But that's an illegitimate
And again,
comparison.
that's
yeah.
what this final prophecy says. The final Roman emperor prophecy says there would be this effort
Right.
to expunge the radicals as they're defined by this coming dictatorship from the Mohammedan religions, the Jewish religions, the Christian religions, and to essentially form a one world order.
It believes in none of them. None of them are true. They're all false, and they all
Right.
merge into this oneism where
Right.
everything's true. You know, it's that same relativist idea I talked about earlier. Now it's pluralism for religion.
We've been talking about, honestly, is a revival.
Yeah.
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 It's
Yeah.
people seeking God, people coming back to God, people wanting God more than anything. You gave some of these headlines, and the headlines. This is today. I mean, one day's headline I could preach for a few hours on them, but just one interesting. Our president, who doesn't seem to want us to have guns, he doesn't like guns. And I don't think Hillary likes guns, so if you want your guns gone, you can vote for Hillary. And a lot of people don't want guns. So if you don't want guns, but under our president, Americans are buying 52,600 guns a day. Since he's been president, they have purchased 141.4 million
Yeah, think about that.
Guns.
141
Right.
million.
And Joe Artist.
Yes.
About that.
Yeah, my son probably owns half of those. So.
That's great.
But I mean, the thing about, and we haven't talked about Orlando with you, but 49 people shot dead
Right.
in that restaurant. That was a gun-free zone, so you couldn't have a gun in that restaurant. But did the criminal, did the murderer
They don't
read the
that.
rules?
They don't read that sign. They'll shoot a hole in the sign as they're walking in the door.
But and then our government has not allowed us to hear his,
Oh, they've completely edited it.
especially the part where he made his allegiance to the head of ISIS. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Now, come on,
and then they ended up
Where
releasing it.
is freedom of speech in the United States of America? Why are they covering up for ISIS? ISIS wants to kill us. You believe ISIS is going to send bombs or drop bombs on our country. How soon do you say it could happen in one day?
It's imminent. It's why I put it in the book. And it's going to be a trigger event that sets a lot of things in motion. Our way of life could change in one day. What he's talking about right there, all we need is one major terrorist event to have the Constitution suspended. And we right now, until at least the election is over, we have a president who would have no problems suspending the Constitution and taking up executive, war power act, whatever, martial law.
Basically has.
Yeah.
49 people shot dead in that restaurant. And I did a show, and I had Harmony, our singer, over there. I just asked her if she was in the restaurant, and she had a gun in her purse. I said, what would she do? She said, I would have killed him, the killer. And the Christians said, you can't do that. Well, you haven't read your Bible. You don't even know your Bible. But to kill this man who's killing these people and save 50, or not 50, but save 48 perhaps even, or 47 even, or if they say 45 people. But that was a gun-free zone, so you couldn't have a gun in that restaurant. But did the criminal, did the murderer read the rules?
They don't read that sign. They'll shoot a hole in the sign as they're walking in the door.
But and then our government has not allowed us to hear his.
Oh, they've completely edited it.
Especially the part where he made his allegiance to the head of ISIS. Is that right?
That's exactly right. They
Now, come on,
and then
come
they
on.
ended up
Where
releasing it.
is freedom of speech in the United
Yeah.
States of America? Why are they covering up for ISIS? ISIS wants to kill us. You believe ISIS is going to send bombs or drop bombs on our country. How soon do you say it could happen in one day?
It's imminent. It's why I put it in the book. And it's going to be a trigger event that sets a lot of things in motion. Our way of life could change in one day. What he's talking about right there, all we need is one major terrorist event to have the Constitution suspended. And we right now, until at least the election is over, we have a president who would have no problems suspending the Constitution and taking up executive, War Power Act, whatever, martial law. To declare, yeah.
So that headline, it says the growing threat of ISIS unleashing a weapon of mass destruction. This is a headline today. And it goes on. FBI didn't inform some Americans, literally thousands of Americans, whose names are on the ISIS kill
Hit
list.
right.
I think we have a right to know.
Bet I'm on there now.
Rick Wiles was on the show, and he was pretty upset because they were all around his house.
Yeah. The terrorists lived 19 miles from the studio. And he was saying, listen, I understand that I'm a pretty high-profile guest in this area. Is my name on this list? And his local law enforcement says, well, I have no idea. We haven't seen the list.
It's like, we didn't hear the list.
Right.
How'd the press get it then? I mean, not the list, but they wrote about the press. Wrote about the list there.
Yes.
And the civil uprising escalates as the 8th EU nation threatens referendum. It looks like the EU could fall apart. Do you have any knowledge on any of that?
Yeah, I think it's up to 10 more nations as of today.
Wow.
And speaking of the revolution, this also now has states in the U.S., like Texas and whatever, talking about how they, in their own way, might want to do the same thing to divest.
Texas.
To
I'll tell you what, after they took and told Texas they could not restrict abortion to take care of the mother, to make sure the mother would, if something terrible was happening, she would be taken care of physically. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they don't start a movement in Texas.
The big question is, where are the feminists?
Yeah.
Where are they?
Because this concerns the rights of women to be treated in a medical facility that's held to hospital standards for a surgical procedure.
Right.
And they're not complaining about that. They're more worried about the right to kill unborn children.
That's right.
Again, it's not rational, which is why I believe that it's supernatural.
People are evil if they want to save their babies. You've got to share your dream because it ties in where we were.
It's so strange, Jim. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that I ever thought that I would be talking about, but it became true. So I'm telling the truth. And I'm actually kind of embarrassed. I mean, because I don't think I'm a prophet. But, I mean, the Bible does use dreams. God uses dreams.
Yeah.
Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king, evil.
Yeah.
It was his dream. Daniel interpreted it, right? But God had a dream. Before Petrus Romanus was big, I had written one thing for Tom. It was a seminary paper. Actually, I kind of recycled it and sent it to Tom. And it was about Christian transhumanism. There were Christians promoting the idea of transhumanism. And Tom just was going to publish that in Pandemonium's Engine. And I wrote him a letter. Have you heard of this prophecy of the Pope's thing? It's an email. And, this guy's the last Pope. Nobody's saying anything about it. What do you think about writing a book? And he had already mentioned it in Apollyon Rising, and I had read that. And the next thing you know, we start working on it, and things just start falling in my lap that never existed before that nobody knew about. And it had to be God, because I'm not that good. But the dream I had, and Tom remembers it, and my wife Shelley remembers it, and I told them about it before it came to pass, is that I was working on television for Tom Horn on something like a newscast.
Wow.
I don't remember the details,
Wow.
I didn't
I
have,
think it was
I had
probably
no
Derek.
TV program or anything at that time.
I think I was probably sitting there
you
with
did?
Derek. in
I
the
was
dream.
just at your new studio.
I'm not
you got
kidding.
a huge
we were
building
announcing that we
you-
thought the end times had started. There was some kind of
Wow.
explosion or something happened, and we were celebrating actually because we thought Jesus was returning. Is the way the dream went, and I woke up, and I didn't think much of it. I told Shelley about it right when it happened, so she can verify that. We were sitting in the parking lot of Southwest Radio Church in a pickup truck, and I told Tom about it. And Tom looked at me and goes, well, I'm not going into TV.
Oh, that's funny.
That was about the end of it. Then he did go into TV. Guess what? I just moved to Crane to work for Skywatch TV.
Right.
Okay, does that mean the rest of the dream's true?
God hadn't talked to Tom yet. That's all. He did, though, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, sure.
But the point was, he saw himself working for Tom Horn,
Wow.
doing television, which we just hired him to do before I even had a studio or even land, was even thinking about building one. But the rest of the dream is apocalyptic.
It is.
Yeah.
This
So
is like
both
the
of you are
beginning.
talking about these explosions, and they're going to happen, people.
Yeah.
You read Scripture, these massive events that take place, but it says here that you in the Mideast you saw something too. Is that at the same time in a dream?
That's Tom's, I think. In the middle. Well, I've had dreams.
A mass explosion in the Middle East.
In the United States. I've had recurring dream of a nuclear explosion in the United States.
And Zach, we've read it, that ISIS is determined to get a nuclear device.
Right.
They desperately, probably priority of their list.
Yeah, well,
They
I mean,
want to drop something that will have a big impact. The bigger, the
100%.
better.
Yes. And I mean, there are even some reports, I know that Tom knows this as well, that ISIS has even purchased a nuclear warhead
Right.
from Pakistan. So we know that. And we also know that they have stolen some of the elements to make a dirty bomb as well. They have that right now in their possession. So when are they going to use it? We don't know. But they know. They have this day of jihad that many of our guests have been talking about for the last couple of years.
Right.
So
Okay, if they're right, what is Christians going to do if this kind of stuff happens? Because America will come to a halt.
Yes.
yes.
We don't do bombing well in our country.
And so, you know, I look right into the TV and say, that's the reason why, Jim, when you're telling people, get ready, get food, get a way of purifying water, get these basic things and have them, because the store shelves will be empty in 30 minutes.
That's right.
When this event
Not
happens.
30 hours,
And the grid
30
goes
minutes.
down. It could be down, even our own government experts, even the pessimists are saying it could be 2 or 3 years trying to get the grid back. We have a God who gives us wisdom. We have a God who tells us how to prepare. When Joseph in Egypt, if they would not have listened, an awful lot of people in those nations would have starved to death.
Yeah.
Yes.
But because they listened and because they set aside, they survived, and the nations around them survived. You said you've got people right now that are laughing at you. Well, I guarantee you a moment is coming when they're going to stop laughing.
Right.
And then they're going to want to know how to get a hold of you and find
Right.
out if you can help them. But the people that are listening to you now, the ones that are doing it ahead of the event, they're going to thank God
That's right.
that you did it. That in spite of the fact that there might be mockers and whatever, there always have been mockers,
That's
right?
Yes.
But in spite of that, you've done it anyway. I happen to know you're not being enriched by this, by the way.
That's right.
I happen to know that. If there's anybody out there thinking, yeah, Jim Bakker's getting rich, well, they're just ignorant beyond belief, right?
Yeah.
Now, Tom, we've been talking about how you've predicted in your book that ISIS, in the next year to 2 years maybe, would detonate some type of weapon of mass destruction somewhere in the world. Maybe Europe, maybe the United States. What will this trigger? There's a couple different things that you've been talking about that it'll trigger. What are these trigger events?
Well, first of all, it's going to trigger what we already talked about. It's going to cause the Muslims to believe that their war is playing out according to their hadith. It's going to cause the Catholics to really start talking about the final Roman emperor. They're going to believe that it's a fulfillment of their apocalyptica. But there are some other things that I think could happen. In fact, the whole thing in Europe right now, these guys are more experts than I am. In fact, Derek's got degrees in economics, and I'm asking them back there, hey, you know, if the European Union falls apart, it ultimately is going to be replaced by something else. And we know that in biblical prophecy, there is going to be this final kingdom on earth, if you will, that'll be headed by the Antichrist. So I was asking them, how do you see maybe something coming out of this? This trigger event is going to put a lot of pressure on the world's governments to create a kind of enforcement, an international enforcement agency that can protect the people of the world. People are going to be crying out for it, and they're going to be willing to lay down their rights to weapons, their rights to anything. If the other thing that we're looking at here is Brexit. They're also talking about abandoning the euro. Now, could this help the dollar? Could the dollar kind of resume its predominance around the world as, you know, kind of the most stable? Yeah, it could. But we also know that the Antichrist is going to have an economic plan of his own, by which no man will buy or sell, save he that hath the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Did you see all these articles just this last week? U.S. Navy discussed plans to fit humans with microchips and to track their every move. This is a vice admiral with 2 or 3 other members of the Navy meeting with Zoltan Istvan, the transhumanist presidential candidate.
I don't understand why they want it. What's the Navy doing?
And by the way, I'm not even saying that microchipping humans will be the mark of the beast. I think it could be something more exotic. But it's the fact that we're moving to an era where people are talking about this now. They're ready to be branded. They're ready to be interconnected with artificial intelligence systems. Here's NBC News, microchipping children coming sooner than you think. Here's Fox News, are implanted chips the future of boarding passes? Students want to be implanted with microchips. Okay, so those articles go on and on. So just in case you want to do it, I brought an implantable RFID microchip.
You're kidding.
No, I don't want this.
Yeah. And there's the device to implant it under your skin.
You can just buy that?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other part of this, which we're starting to see some calls for, if you watch, is that there are prominent economists who are calling for an end to cash, physical money.
Yes.
In fact, a number of high-powered bankers got together at a secret meeting at a hotel in Times Square a few weeks back to talk about developing a digital currency. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, banks want to control all of our money, and they want to be able to start charging negative interest. So if you have money in the bank, they want to charge you for the privilege of holding your money. They're trying that in some countries now. But they've got to get us away from using folding money first. And so you'll see prominent people like the former Treasury Secretary, Lawrence Summers, say the only people who use $100 bills are tax cheats, criminals, and terrorists. Right. In the European Union, they banned the 500 euro note. They're going to get rid of it within a couple of years. Wow. Because the only people who use it are terrorists and people who don't want their transactions tracked. So the chip becomes essential if the only way you can move money from one place to another to buy or sell is if it's digital. And that move is coming. If you pay attention to the news, you'll see these stories pop up every now and again about how economists say in order to get the economy moving again, we need to get rid of cash. We need to make it all digital.
You're talking about ISIS has been asking, help to conquer Rome. I mean, that's pretty wild. ISIS wants to destroy Rome. Isn't that in some old prophecy? Didn't we talk about that?
Well, actually, there's several prophecies that talk about the destruction of Rome, including Catholic prophecies. The prophecy of the Pope ends with the destruction of Rome. The Fatima, which is one of their most celebrated apparitions, sees the Pope stumbling over bodies as these ISIS-like fighters run in and kill him. I mean, so, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The Roman Catholics also believe this. So, in other words, we're not talking about something that is at odds with their belief system. We're talking about something that absolutely coalesces with some of their most ancient belief systems. But what this book does is say the real common denominator is we're really talking about the coming of the Antichrist. The Catholics are setting themselves up for the coming of a final Roman emperor or a great monarch who they think then is going to oppose the Antichrist. He's going to be the Antichrist. The Muslims, because he's going to unify the Muslim, Catholic, and Jewish religions. They're going to see him as their Mahdi.
You mentioned in your book, because I read it there somewhere, there's going to be a harvest of souls. There's going to be, in all this hell, there's going to be some sort of, like a revival,
right.
But it's going to be perilous times. I mean, there's just no doubt about what's coming.
Well, and it's not without precedent. You know, when you were talking a moment ago, and Lori added, this is why we can rejoice, because we can see the positive side of everything that's happened. It all looks really dark right now, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But when you study the history of Great Awakenings,
Right.
every single one of them was at its darkest moment. Politically, economically, plagues, terrible stuff happening, and the church was asleep. And then a providential thing came along. Something started happening. And it was always something that God did, but it was God taking beauty out of ashes, God bringing strength out of weakness.
Yes.
It was always God reviving the remnant that was there, right? And so I liken this in the book to World War II, when at the end of World War II, the world became aware of the Holocaust. You know, back then we had television, but it wasn't really widely publicized. A lot of people didn't know much about it. A lot of people also don't know that there already was a Zionist movement, but it wasn't really going anywhere. Britain wasn't really behind it. The United States wasn't really behind this idea of pushing to get a nation state for Israel. But then World War II ended, and the world found out about the Holocaust. They saw the ovens. They saw Dachau. They saw Auschwitz. They learned of the millions and millions of Jews that had died in those horrible, terrible camps. And the heart of the world came out for Israel, right? All of a sudden, this whole Zionist movement got wings. It got, wind in its sails. The United States started pushing. Britain started pushing. Now, what happened? So, 1948, Israel becomes a nation again officially. But guess what happened to the church that was snoozing at the time? The church that was asleep, they saw the birth of a nation in one day. They saw this as the fulfillment of the fig tree prophecy. And they knew that Jesus had said, when you see the budding of the fig tree, that generation will not pass away till all these things have been fulfilled. And the church suddenly woke up. It gave birth to what today we call the age of fire. You benefited from it. I benefited from it. All of the great preachers came along, from Billy Graham, and now you've got his kids on your program, right? And Catherine Kuhlman and Oral Roberts and A.A. Allen, who's, by the way, I gave testimonies in A.A. Allen's tent meetings years ago with R.W. Shambach. Remember that prairie preacher? It gave birth to the age of fire that literally swept the world, and literally millions and millions of people came to know the Lord. A little bit later, it happened again through the Jesus Freak movement. What I'm saying is, there is going to be a catastrophic event, but it's going to cause the church to wake up. It's going to cause people to get serious. It's going to cause preachers, I think, to start preaching the gospel again. And I'm taking some heat for this, by the way, in that I'm saying there's also going to be a lot of women preachers. And people don't like that. Some of my Baptist friends, a woman should keep... I'm telling you, this revival is going to have some of the most powerful preachers in the form of women who are going to unapologetically preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think it's going to give birth to the greatest revival in the history of humanity, coming right out of the ashes of chaos.
Sons and daughters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your
sons
handmaidens,
and
that's woman, handmaiden.
Yeah.
You know, and it's there. It's there. And it's going to happen. And God is going to do, God's going to use the unusual and the unused in the last days. On page 102. By the way, one of my cellmates is in your book.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that?
Yes.
You didn't know? Yeah. A man who lived in the prison cell with me is in your book.
It's true.
On page 102. Yeah, he's twice in your book. And
I know him.
Lyndon H. LaRouche wrote in 1992. I'm just reading from your book.
This is me.
you might say that the World War III has already begun.
Right.
Because Freemason Albert Pike received a vision which he described in a letter that he wrote on August 15th, 1871. Can you explain what this was in this letter?
I mean, Pope Francis has been going around talking about there's an ongoing Third World War. You know, Tom and I are looking at, is this the Vatican's last crusade? Because he's using all this language that sounds like he wants to start a war with ISIS in the name of Christianity almost. And a lot of Christians are being killed in Syria, and that's certainly true. Yes. But Pope Francis is articulating language that talks to the Catholic just war tradition that Thomas Aquinas started, and it's well known. We can tell that he means, you know, go fight ISIS. And you have the Pope saying that, that's a big deal. So it's moving us to globalism, right? Back to that same idea. And that's what LaRouche was talking about. And he said that these guys have a plan, and they're trying to move us to a global government. And it wasn't just him.
Now, this Albert Pike, who he talks about, I think, and a Freemason,
right,
in 1871, right, gives the detailed predictions of 3 world wars.
Now, Jim, it's controversial. Some people have tried to debunk it. And the reason why is a fellow named Guy Carr wrote a book, Pawns in the Game. Now, he was a former Canadian intelligence officer, so he had some respect. He wasn't, you know, just some yahoo. But he believed that Mazzini, an Italian Freemason, had written a letter to the founder of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Albert Pike. You know, they had a plan. They were going to start 3 world wars. And he goes on to describe in great detail the details of 2 of them that we've already experienced. I mean, he used words like, we're going to put the Zionists against the fascists for World War II. I mean, it's so obvious. And what was the purpose of that? To promote communism. So that the next war, we're going to put the Muslims against the Zionists again. And so you see the thing going on in Jerusalem, and you see that they want to use the Muslims to move the world toward a totalitarian state. Okay, now, I can't prove that that letter's real, but there was a priest who wrote a book, copyright 1925, and he mentioned it. Okay, so if it was written after World War II, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? How did that priest mention the letter in 1925? So that tells me there's something going on. There was something like it, and it might be that Guy Carr embellished a little bit. I can't prove that. There was an anti-Catholic kind of writer who made fun of all this, and he hammed it up a little bit, and Guy Carr believed him too much and quoted him like a real source. So people on the internet will say the whole thing's a joke because of that. But they don't really know about the Catholic priest who wrote the book, who actually they had the popes did the introduction for the book, so it wasn't just some little trivial Catholic book. It was taken quite seriously. And it was called The Mystery of Freemasonry Revealed. Okay, and you could get that book, and we have it on our bonus disc with the Final Roman Emperor, and you can look at it yourself. And you know, he claims he saw that letter, and in that letter, you know, we're right at the cusp of that Third World War, if that is the plan, and the whole purpose is to move us to a global government.
We have been moving in one direction for a long time then, and I have never seen anything like what we're living in right now, worldwide. Europe is not the same place. You all been to Europe over your lifetime, I'm sure. It's just a different world. I just got one more thought. This exit has really upset some people. And the people that voted for it, they were thrilled. I mean, you could see they were dancing in the streets. They were happy. It was like a big load came off from them. And, of course, they were telling them to, you know, what the temperature of their tea was going to be. I mean, did you hear this? I mean, and they weren't their tea and crumpets or something. They weren't going to give them any more.
Yeah, some of the regulations were simply ludicrous, like the rule that you can't recycle a tea bag, or that children under 8 cannot blow up balloons, or the limits on the power of vacuum cleaners. The regulations were completely oppressive.
But that's, you know, as Zach pointed out, that's why the cost to the UK, for being a member of the EU, was much higher than the benefit. It was, it was putting a damper on the economy. And of course, then they were being expected as a member of the European Union to do what, well, let's be honest, to do what Germany wanted, which was to open up the borders and let people in. And the Brits have been seeing for years what, honestly, we're seeing here in the United States to some extent. It's not the same country that the people grew up in. It's not what they signed up for. So the Prime Minister there, David Cameron, a couple of years ago, who was facing pressure from this up-and-coming political party in the UK Independence Party, led by Nigel Farage, forced them, really, to having this referendum. It passed by a slim margin, about 52%, 48%. The thing is, it's not a binding referendum. Parliament could decide to ignore it. I don't think they will.
America wanted a change.
Well, and I think it's the same spirit that led to the vote in Britain getting out of the EU. And the reaction that we're seeing from the elites in Europe is similar to the reaction to the elites in the United States to the rise of Donald Trump. It's almost as though they were horrified to find out that the middle class could actually vote.
Right.
Yeah, what's going on with that elitist group? I'm watching some people who say they're Republicans, and they say they're going to vote for the Democratic Party. That doesn't sound like any Republican I ever knew.
No.
You know, what is going on?
It's an agenda that isn't what they've been telling us it is. They want to keep the United States military engaged in wars that, to be quite honest, have no real benefit to the United States public. They want it because it keeps the money flowing. It's as President Eisenhower warned in his farewell speech, the military-industrial complex. And I think you could call it the military-industrial congressional complex because they have representatives who are doing a fine job in keeping the contracts going.
The profits from war.
Exactly. As General Smedley Butler, who was a Marine Corps hero, said back in the 1920s, war is a racket. And sadly, business is very good.
Yep.
That's right.